Thank you so much.
Okay, welcome everyone. A lot of folks are going to be watching this video from YouTube, so I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Brooke Bullock. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to be teaching our cooking workshop this evening. And with me, I have my colleague, Joshua Fowler. You want to say hi, Joshua?
Sure. Hi, I'm Joshua Fowler, and I use he, him. I'll be helping Brooke today.
And just a quick little update before we get started. Just Fruits Farm, for those of you who don't know, is a CSA farm, meaning we do farm shares to our community at large. And what this means is we have either monthly or weekly pickups where you can get bountiful boxes filled with local sourced from our farm and from some other small farm produce. And so if you're interested in signing up for one of our CSA programs, go ahead and visit our website. And you can check out our different payment plans that we offer. And we also accept SNAP or EBT and the free HIP money that comes with it. So we do encourage you to check it out. Come pick your own vegetables at our farm and come check out what our summer CSA is like. If you have any questions, you can email me or Joshua. It's just our names at justfruits.org. Great. So today we are making a hearty Italian seasoned quinoa soup. And we chose this recipe because it's, super high in protein. It's a great winter stew to make you feel like warm and full, and it's creamy and zingy and delicious. So it's just kind of one of my easy go-to soups. And having quinoa as a grain, I'm always looking to use different grains, not just rice or wheat in what I'm cooking. So I like that it's a gluten-free option. Today, we are going to have, there's one thing I'm missing that you will have, and Joshua's going to help us with this, is celeriac, which is that bit kind of root-looking whitish crop. Yeah, Joshua's holding it up. We've got some carrots, garlic, probably going to use 4 or 5 cloves of that. You might have a whole head. Some onion, either vegan sausage or meat sausage. So there's pork and vegan, depending on what you ask for, and we'll talk about different directions for those. We've got a big can of diced tomatoes, some oregano for Italian seasoning, red pepper, some vegetable broth or stock, your quinoa, of course. Don't worry about measuring that out. That bag is exactly what you need for today's meal. Some chickpeas and spinach. Oh, and I'm throwing spinach around. And some things that are optional for today that did not come with your kit, they are totally optional, is red pepper flakes. So if you have those at home, you can use some of those. And then if you want your soup to be creamy, you may want to use half and half regular milk, or I'm using extra creamy plant milk. Another thing that folks who do not use dairy could use is like a little scoop of vegan cream cheese or sour cream. Those, I can explain that in a little bit, but that's what I've got out today. The most important thing probably is what we're going to be cooking this in, because this is kind of like a one pot soup. And so we're going to cut everything and everything's going to end up cooking in our pot. So what you're looking for is something that is obviously stovetop safe. And we're going to be getting something quite large, because if you look at the size of your tomato can and you look at the size of your vegetable broth, all of that's going to want to fit in here, plus your veggies and some milk. So we want to make sure we have a good size. And the other things that you're going to want to have nearby are a fine mesh sieve. You might want to know what's this for. It's like super tiny little mesh, so not much can fall through. And the reason I have this out is to rinse quinoa, because they're not going to actually fall through. If you don't have one of these, I suggest just leave your quinoa be. Don't bother rinsing it, because you're going to lose all of your quinoa putting it through a regular strainer. So it's okay if you don't have one.
Brooke,
Yeah.
What does rinsing quinoa do?
That's a great question. So for one, if crops are grown with pesticides, it's nice to be able to get any of that crop residue out. These crops are fine. They're not, I feel safe. We got these from Foster's. You also want to do is you want to get out any of the extra chaff or dust that's on it. And it's kind of, or starches. Like when you rinse rice, you'll see like a cloudy, milky color. Those are extra starches that we don't really want in that quinoa. We don't want it to be sticky. Great question. And then we're going to use a regular strainer for our chickpeas because we're going to drain them. And if you're interested, if you have Parmesan at home, you can also, use some kind of grater for that. And then really just a can opener and a peeler if you're going to peel your carrots. So just because we started a little late today, I'm going to get moving through it. I'm starting with my meat. I have clean hands. And what I'm going to do actually, for folks who have a vegan sausage, it's probably not going to grind. Like if you removed the outer casing, it just usually won't break down into pieces. So you can cook yours just by making little slices. That's going to be harder with the meat sausage, but you can slice it into little rounds. Okay, and then what I'm doing with the meat sausage is I put a hole at one end. And you can tell the sausage is starting to come out. And I'm going to put that inside of a pot, and I'm going to take the skin casing off. So I'm going to bring it back to ground with maybe 2 tablespoons of olive oil, okay? So I'm going to do that by eye, but basically you just want to coat the bottom of your pan so that your meat isn't burning. Great. And now I'm going to go ahead and put in my pork sausage. And so folks who are using vegan sausage, you're going to want to cut those into little slices. And then you can also put them in a pan with some olive oil. So the way that I'm doing this for the meat sausage is I'm just squeezing it to get the meat out towards the bottom. You can go out both sides if you want. You can also cut it all the way down the middle. It's a little bit messier that way. Okay. And so what you're left with is just the casing. And you can trash that. I'm going to do the same thing. Open it up. And if you're already a step ahead of me, you can go ahead and put your heat on medium low. Medium low is how we're going to cook this.
It's delicious when that garlic gets nice and brown in that low heat over time.
Yep. Okay, so I'm just finishing up here, getting the meat out of the casing because I'm going to have it ground in this. Fantastic. And now I'm going to wash my hands very well. And the cutting board and knife that I used is going directly to the wash sink. And now you can prep a second cutting board or wash the one you already have. Just take a moment to do that. Make sure you have a clean knife to do your vegetables. So I'm moving this sausage to medium-low heat, and I'm going to let this cook for a little while we prep our other veggies. If you need to, you can break it up with a wooden spoon a little bit so it cooks faster, but we're not in a rush. We've got plenty of time. All right, so I'm going to start off with my carrots. And what I'm going to do, you do not have to peel carrots. You absolutely don't. There's a lot of nutrients in the skin. Some recipes call for it and some don't. This one did, so we're going to go ahead and do it. And folks might be wondering, what happens if I don't have a vegetable peeler? Well, your options are you don't peel it, or you can use like a little paring knife, which I don't have right next to me. But basically, you can cut away from yourself with a paring knife to get that outer layer of skin off. Like that. But a paring knife is a lot smaller than this one. So you wouldn't want to use one that big. I'm going to finish off grating these. And we're going to, the recipe says 3 carrots. These are pretty big carrots, so we're just going to use 2. And for some reason, when I'm grating carrots, I just always get them all over the place, the little skins that I cut off. And sometimes I save these for chickens or for my dog's food.
What does your dog think about carrots?
I have to boil or blend them in with meat, or he won't touch them. But I know some people's dogs are good vegetable eaters.
I've heard that too.
Not mine. He'd gladly take the sausage casing, so. Okay, so with our carrots, there's plenty of options with how they're going to be cooked. They're just going into a soup. You can cube them, you can dice them, you can just do little rounds as well. For this, I'm going to make them a little bit smaller than rounds. So I'm going to cut the carrot in half and then in half again on either side.
Look at that knife. It's beautiful. Is that a chef's knife?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's my only sharpened knife. We have to sharpen all of our knives, so this is what we're using today. And then it's quite gorgeous, so yeah. And then I'm doing just kind of like little cubes. And I'll hold those up for you to see. Bite-sized pieces on both of my carrots. Make them a little spot on the cutting board. You can also move them to a bowl if you'd like. So I did in half. I'm going to do in half again. Then I line up all 4. Oops, and we dropped one. That's for me. That's what we got. So that's all the carrots going into our soup. And if your meat hasn't started sizzling, you can turn it up a little bit. Want to get that oil warm. And hopefully we're at a good pace, and I'm going to move on to our onions. So I'm going to slice off the end of both sides. You can do this 2 ways. I'm going to show you a couple different ways to peel the onion. I always just take off that first layer of skin by making a small incision, basically. And it allows me to peel off that outer layer that is usually too dry and not super tasty. Then, so this is like the root side. I can cut it in half. And then you can make some slices. We're dicing this, by the way. I didn't go through quite at the other side, so it kind of holds the onion together for me as I dice. And I can show that again with our other. The recipe calls for half of an onion. And I think about grocery store onions and how big they are a lot. You know, those big factory produced ones. I have an example. So I would only use half of an onion this size, but with the onions we're working with today, I think you can do a full onion if you want, or maybe if you have a smaller one, you can add that to it too. If you're like me, your meat is starting to sizzle. So I'm just breaking up the little clumps. And it's on medium heat. And basically what we're doing with the meat is just simply browning it even if it's vegan sausage, because we're gonna take it out, use a slotted spoon and remove it, and we're not gonna put it back in until it pretty much the soup is almost ready to serve. So we do want to cook it fully, but we're not trying to, it's gonna go back in the soup, it's gonna get reheated and get warm. So I'm going to show that once more for y'all. Okay, so I'm going to cut off this end, this time maybe a little bit different, and make a small incision. And use my fingernail kind of to get in here and peel up the first layer. And you'll notice the color is a little bit different from the inside of the onion, and that's kind of what I want to remove. Just like that. Then you can go in half. So I still have this root piece attached. Then I'm going to make some vertical cuts. And then come through with horizontal cuts, and it's just the perfect dice ready to go. And do that once more. This was a tiny onion, so if you're sensitive to onion, as some folks might be, you totally use as much as you need. The big point in this is it's a good flavoring agent. Fantastic. I did it without crying. That's a first. And I'm going to pause, and you may want to too, to give this a stir. I'm going to leave them as like pretty big, decent sized chunks. And just break them up with your spoon. And if you've got vegan slices, make sure to flip them so that both sides get nice and brown. So right now I've got olive oil and some of the fat from the pork. If you have regular meat sausage or pork sausage, is starting to come out. And I'm going to use that fat to cook my vegetables in. If you do not want to, go ahead and strain your meat when you remove it and put that oil in a separate bowl that you can toss, and then you'll add some more olive oil or butter, whatever you want to cook your vegetables in. I am going to use this because I think it really helps with the flavor profile of the stew. I still got some pink in here, which tells me I'm not fully cooked. And with pork, I want to fully cook it. I'm going to turn my heat down a little bit, just so I can, and feel free to do this one step at a time. You don't have to move exactly when I am. You'll have plenty of time. But I just want to demo what I think is the best way to process garlic. Sometimes if I have a broad, flat knife like this, I just give it a pop to remove the skin. If you have a smaller knife, you can do the same thing by setting it on top of the garlic. Let me make sure you can see. Yeah. And pushing. Just like that. And then the skin kind of comes off almost in one, all in one piece. I always cut off the root end because it's hard. Sometimes you can just pop it off with your fingers. I'm going to prepare these garlic to mince. So I'm just removing the skins and the end. Skin removed. And chopped. Switch back because it's very fast and easy this way. So folks, part of this, what we like to
Welcome, Judy.
Hi, Judy. I'm so glad you got to make it. It's good to have you back. There's only a couple of us today, and we are just working on getting our meat or vegan sausage cooked or browned, and we're getting close. And just so I can show you, this is what mine looks like right now. There's still some pink, and it's kind of in these larger chunk crumbles, and that's how I want it to be for my soup. Okay. We have just cut up our carrots and our onions, 2 carrots and a half to a whole onion. It's great. And now we're doing some garlic. You can do 4 or 5 cloves. If you're a garlic lover, I think you could do even more. I am a garlic lover, but I'm going to stick to this because I already had a bunch today. So veggies, getting close. Now, before I'm going to pass it over to Joshua to do the celeriac, I'm going to finish this pork just so make sure we all have time to catch up and be at the same point. So, doing my final little chops. And my pork looks cooked. And don't forget, towards the end, it'll go right back in that pot for just about a minute. Best, if you're going to leave the grease in, you can use a slotted spoon or, a spatula, something with holes in it. And then you can use the grease to cook your vegetables and they'll have that Italian sausage flavor on them. If you don't want to use the grease, I would pour it into a colander or a strainer, get that grease out, put it in a bowl, let it cool and toss it, and then start over with some olive oil. I'm going to turn my heat off so I don't get any splatters on my skin. And I'm going to use a spatula here. Let the drips, as many of the drips come off as you need. And I'm going to put it on a side plate and I will come back, I promise. We will add it back to our soup. Now, if you have vegan sausage, do the same thing. You're just going to remove it. We don't need it cooking right now. And especially if you have vegan sausage, you're going to need to add some more olive oil with a couple of tablespoons in there so we can cook our vegetables in the same pot. Recipes like this are some of my favorite because they only require 1 pot, which means less dishes. So I'm going to set this off to the side so I don't need to think about it right now. And I need to think about it. All right, so just to show you what I got left, I have a little bit of oil in here and a little bit of fat. I'd say probably around 3 tablespoons. Okay. If you want to remove some of that, you can. I'm going to use it all. I like it. Next, I turned off the heat. We don't need that right now. And Joshua is going to show you what celeriac is and how to cut it. And I'll tell you what it is first. And just give me 1 second because I'm going to add a spotlight. So he's on. Just a quick intro. What the heck is this root? This is a weird plant. Well, actually, it's celery. And that's kind of funny because, well, it doesn't look anything like celery, but it is the same exact species as celery. It's just been selected for or bred to have larger roots. So it's a variety of celery that instead of having a nice stalk, normally you'll see little celery stalks come off the top of that. It has a really well-formed root. And when you cook this root, it's a little bit sweeter than celery and a little more mild, which is why I love using it in soups as like a stock flavoring. It has a really tough outer skin typically, and often you have to cut quite a bit of that root off that you might not want to use. We're gonna peel it, dice it, and get it ready for our stew. So Joshua, I'll be quiet for a moment and let you take over.
So this is one of my favorites. It's kind of, a lot of people sleep on this. This is a delicious winter vegetable. And like Brooke said, it's really excellent in soups. I have a particularly thin-skinned specimen of celeriac. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this peeler. You can absolutely use a knife. Try to cut away from yourself if you can, but you're going to want to get rid of a lot of this. Certainly the hairs and the roots. You'll have some funny hairy roots at the bottom here that can actually break off. What I'm going to do with those, because I know that I'm going to lose a lot at the bottom, I'm just going to take my chef's knife and cut off about 3/4 inch. Boom, goodbye. That seems like it's quite a bit, but you don't want to get, there can be a lot of dirt in celeriac. And even if you clean it well, which you should, you really just want to make sure that you get all that out. Now, I'm just going to take a regular peeler. Again, you can use a paring knife or a chef's knife. I like these little chef knives as well, knives as well. Try to cut away from yourself as you can. I'm terrible at that, but you can take this and peel it just like you peel an apple. So I'm just going through. I want to make sure that I get as much of the skin off, because it can be a little bit rough, as possible. And there's this beautiful flesh underneath. And if you smell it, it's so sweet and delicious. And it really has that celery flavor late into the season. The stores like crazy. It is an excellent stew vegetable. And it just gets, I think, underutilized because it's ugly.
Yeah.
But
Josh, can I pause you for 1 second?
Of course you can.
Do you guys see how big that celeriac is? If your celeriac is that size, we can use 1/2 to 1/4 of it. It's not going to overpower your dish. The more the merrier, I think, in this super stew, but I don't think you need the whole thing. So if you want to save some for a different recipe, you can do that. You could cut that in 1/2 or in 1/4, and that's what we'll be working with. One thing to note is that when you store that, you're going to want to store it with some, because we're peeling, with some, like in a Tupperware or a Ziploc or something that you're not getting oxygen all over. Done.
Right, so we have this beautiful peeled celeriac here, and I'm just going to go and cut about 1 inch at a time here. I have to sharpen my knives clearly. I haven't been cutting a whole lot of celeriac. It'll get real tender once it goes into your soup, but for now it can be kind of a chore to cut. Now we're just going to cube these into about 1 inch, 3/4 inch cubes. I don't think you have to be super particular about it. Some of these guys are probably a little bit big, and you can cut those again.
Oh, it's fine.
Boom. And this is probably the amount of celeriac that you really want to use. So you have these little cubes of celeriac, and they're at about 1 inch or 3/4 inch size. And again, it's not a real overpowering smell. So if you want to use a little bit more, you could. I imagine that your celeriac pieces over there are not quite as big as this monster mutant that I found at the store today. So I like celeriac, and I'm going to put extra in mine.
Someone just asked really quick. I'm going to remove your spotlight. Thank you very much. That was beautiful. Someone just asked, mine is brown inside. Does that matter? It shouldn't be like rotting on the inside. So if you're seeing flesh that's kind of starting to deteriorate, that means that is not a good plant to eat. You could cut around those areas. It should be like creamy, whitish, off-white. Those are normal. But if it's like brown and gooey, that means that vegetable has rotted, and I'm sorry if that did happen. It's tough with root crops because you can't see inside of them, and they might look perfectly good on the outside. So use what you can of that, of areas that, cut around, and use the white parts that you can.
And you can see too, sometimes those roots, like they go in pretty deep. So you can smell it too and see if it smells fresh to you. and do cut around, because often you'll have a root that will go deep and create like brown, rooty internal space.
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, so I'm just working on mincing all my garlic cloves. And I just turned my heat back on to medium on my pot. So I've got either you put some olive oil or you left some fat in there from your sausage. And we're gonna start cooking the celeriac first before anything else. So I'm letting the pan heat up and I'm chopping my garlic just because it's something I can do right now. And it's okay if the celeriac didn't work out for you. You're still gonna have a delicious soup. Okay, so this is looking good. I want to mince that garlic, get it pretty small. And I'm starting to hear my pan sizzle again, which means that oil's getting warm. We're gonna first put the celeriac in, but you could honestly put your carrots in at the same time as the celeriac because they're both, hearty, starchy root vegetables that are gonna need a little bit extra time to cook. The really important thing is don't put your garlic in right now. You might want to know why that is, because it burns. Garlic burns pretty quick. So I hear the beautiful noise I want to hear. And the carrots are going in. Yes, love that sound. Go ahead and toss in your celeriac as well. I'm going to pretend. Folks, I couldn't find any celeriac today or yesterday because it is a pretty rare crop. And that's one of the really cool things about getting a CSA is you get a lot of these vegetables that don't show up at the grocery store all the time. And I learned so much, I'm learning about vegetables too. And I'd never cooked with celeriac before I worked at Just Roots. And it's so exciting to learn about crops that have been historically grown or selected to have different things like a beet and Swiss chard. One is selected for their green leaves and one has been selected for its nice root. Pretty cool. Go ahead and give them a little bit of a stir. Make sure the olive oil is coating everything. And so your celeriac and your carrots are in your pot. You're on medium heat. We're just going to cook these a little bit before they get in our soup. And in a minute or so, we can add our onions. And if you're a step ahead, go ahead and start opening those cans with your can opener while we wait. Do not drain your tomatoes. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. It's in the recipe, but we're going to use that delicious tomato juice. So don't drain them. Hang on to all the juice and the tomato. The beans we are going to drain. We don't want to drink that bean juice. That's, again, a great situation of what Joshua asked earlier, is that water is really starchy. And we don't want that in our soup. Kind of like when you soak quinoa or rice. So I got those two cans open. I'm gonna give my stuff a stir. Let's go ahead and add in your onion. Keep the heat at medium. And sometimes what I do to make this process happen a little bit quicker is I'll add in a small pinch of salt and pepper, and we're going to season them a little bit. So a small pinch.
Just one sec, Brooke. There's a question about garlic being green inside. It's okay if garlic's a little green. It just means that it's sprouting. You can chop it right up. As long as it's fresh and it smells good, it's good to use.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, the garlic's basically, if you planted that in the ground, that shoot would come up and start a new garlic plant, and it's totally good to eat. You can eat it just like we eat green onions. That's a shoot coming up off the bulb part of the plant. All right, my onions are in and I'm stirring. I put in a small pinch of salt. You can do 1 or 2 pinches. Not going to hurt. It's going to be a big stew, so we're going to have to add quite a bit of salt and pepper. And you can do a couple shakes of pepper, white or black pepper, whatever you want. Not the red pepper yet. Stir it around. So I'm looking for my onions now to turn a little bit translucent. And at that point, I'm going to add my garlic. My minced garlic is not severely minced. It's still pretty big. Okay. It doesn't have to be teensy tiny for this recipe. I love the questions we're getting tonight. Those are important questions that I feel like sometimes get overlooked. And when you're working with local produce and it's not from a factory farm, sometimes you have these things that aren't uniform in the crop and it's confusing. Like, can I eat this? Why does it do that? So I love hearing those questions. They help other people. All right, that's really starting to smell good. I'm going to add my onion. This is another reason I love these broad knives. They can hold so much.
Yeah, the thing is practically a cleaver. I have so much. I've got knife envy. Look at it. Gorgeous.
I'll have to get you one next holiday season. Know what to get you. All right, if you're starting to see any burning, you can add a little olive oil or you can turn the heat down. Those are your options. I'm still not because I think the grease, but. And I'm just going to keep it at this heat for 30 more seconds, a minute on the garlic. I don't want it to burn. That tastes horrible. Constantly stir once you have the garlic in there. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my heat off for now. Okay, I don't recommend you do this, but I'm going to pick it up just to show you what I've got, what I'm working with. Okay, there's no dripping of oil. Pretty much the oil's all absorbed in the onions and carrot and garlic, and in your case, the celeriac too. The onions look soft, starting to be translucent. The carrots are softening. Your celeriac is too. I turn the heat off on my stove and we're going to get ready for the rest of the action. Okay, I have out a little bowl. That's just to put all my combined ingredients. You can put them, you know what? We don't need this bowl. We can put them directly in our stock pot because less dishes is always better. I'm just removing it from the heat. So I moved it to a burner that's not on. If you have a gas stove, you're fine. I have an electric. It takes a long time to cool down. I'm going to turn my camera and I'll show you how I'm going to drain, rinse, and strain the chickpeas. I already opened these. We're going to use the whole can. Here we go. I know it's kind of messy. All my kitchen's cooking stuff. All right. So there's all that chickpea juice coming out. All right, can is empty. And I'm going to strain. All right, and that should be good. I'm just going to let it sit in my strainer for a minute to get out any excess water. Now, we'll do the same thing. I already pre-measured these bags for the quinoa, and they're exactly what you need. So you can put your whole bag either directly into the pot, or you can do a rinse first if you have a fine mesh sieve. So I guess this might be helpful to have an additional bowl for this. But basically, I'm going to pour it into my sieve and lightly run some water over it. Get that extra water out in my bowl, and I'm gonna do the same thing. I have a small sieve, so gotta do it twice. And if you weren't here before, I don't know if everyone was here at this time. We are doing this to remove excess starches and like basically dust, like grain dust from the outside of our quinoa, but it's not necessary. So if you don't have a fine mesh sieve, skip it. And so now I have rinsed quinoa. Beautiful. Taking you back over here. Make sure you can see my cutting board. Fantastic. Okay, so we've got our quinoa, our tomatoes ready to go. Our beans are strained and drained. And now we just need our vegetable stock. So the recipe calls for 4 cups. This is a little bit, either a little bit less or a tiny bit more than 4 cups. Just use the whole thing. So we have vegetable stock. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pour this right on the pot. And at that point, I can turn my heat on again. So whole thing's going in. Fantastic. All right. Same thing with my tomatoes. Once you get those open, the whole thing's going in. So juice or all the liquid as well, not just the diced or not just the diced tomato. Now I'm going to get some spices out. How are we doing? Very good. When you're ready, you can toss in your chickpeas. So we've got tons of protein with the chickpeas and the quinoa. Let's get the quinoa in there. And basically, once we turn this back on and bring it to a boil, once it gets to a boil, we're going to let it go down to simmer again, and we're going to simmer it for 20 to 25 minutes. And that's going to ensure that our quinoa gets fully cooked. Okay. So I'm going to stir all my ingredients in so far. I'm going to turn the heat on high because I want to bring it back to a boil. And we'll do our seasoning. So in your kit, you got oregano, the like key Italian seasoning ingredient. And I'm going to do a whole teaspoon of, let me just double check, or a whole tablespoon. So that's the biggest one on the measure. And do a whole tablespoon. It might seem like a lot, but it's the main flavor in here. Okay. Then we are going, if you decided and you had it at home, you wanted some crushed red pepper, let's do this to taste. Ignore what I do. If you like things spicy, great. You can do like, you know, maybe a half teaspoon is the most I would do for this soup. A quarter teaspoon is what I'm going to do. And really that just looks like, that's a dash. That's what I call a dash. Okay, you can always add a little more later. Now, here's the tricky part. This is where most people vastly differ. Salt and pepper. I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of salt, and then I'm going to taste it later. I'm not going to add any other salt until if you have Parmesan cheese, until after I added that, because Parmesan is pretty salty. So I'm adding 1 teaspoon of salt. 1 teaspoon, not tablespoon, teaspoon. How much seasoning? 1 tablespoon. So 1 tablespoon. One tablespoon of the oregano. Okay, and I added 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of salt, and then black pepper to taste, like an 1/8 teaspoon, something like that.
All right, can you stop for one moment? It looks like there's a question.
How much sausage do you use? Judy, you can use all of the sausage, but we're gonna cook that separately first.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. All right, and I'm stirring in those spices. And folks, I got out a couple of other things. If you ever want to try seasoning this soup, I'm not going to use these tonight, but I just thought I love using celery salt. This, especially because I should use this because I don't have celeriac today. It's a great way to get some like celery seasoning. You can get that at most grocery stores. Some dried rosemary. That would also go really good in this dish. And thyme. Those are some of my favorite culinary herbs to add to the mix. Celery salt is mixed with salt, so it's going to be, or it has salt in it, so it's going to make your dish more salty, so be aware of that. And we really only have a couple steps left. My soup is about to start boiling, so I'm going to go ahead and set a timer for 25 minutes, and that's how long it's going to take to cook the quinoa on a simmer. You can cover. You can also not cover your pot. So you can use a cover or you cannot. It's okay if you don't like this. The important thing is that we are not adding our meat, we're not adding our cream, and we're not adding the spinach until we're like pretty much done. And that's because we don't want the spinach to overcook. We don't want the cream to overcook. Now you might be using plant milk instead. And we don't want the meat to overcook. Something else is that I suggest when you're putting in your heavy cream, your half and half, or your milk, whatever it is, the recipe calls for 1 1/2 cups of milk. I would not put that all in. I would use your intuition. Put 1/4 of it in, stir it, taste it, see if you like it. Put a little more and try it out and see where your tastes lie. Try putting in your Parmesan cheese and then seeing if you really even want more milk in it. Those are all definitely options you can have.
Brooke, if I may, just for a moment.
Yeah.
If you're using a non-dairy milk, I would suggest just to be careful because some of them are sweet. And if they are sweet, especially if you get like a vanilla by accident, it can really make your soup taste pretty strange. So make sure you know what you're getting into when you use a non-dairy creamer for this.
Great point, Joshua. That would be pretty horrible. Yeah, that's a good thing to acknowledge.
I've done it before.
Yikes. All right, so I'm going to pour out some of my milk, so that's ready. And I'm only going to do probably half what the recipe recommends and see how I feel about it. And then we're going to use about 2 cups of roughly chopped spinach. Let me just make sure it was 2 cups. Yeah, 2 cups. So to me, I'm like, I know what a cup looks like, and you could always try to stuff that spinach into a cup, physical measuring cup. But here's my 1 cup expanded. 1 cup expanded, 1 cup shrunken. It's kind of quite different, but that's what it looks like on my cutting board in a pile. So that's 1 cup, and I'm going to do 1 more. If you're not a huge spinach fan, that's okay. Go slow. Feel free to cut it in half. You don't have to exactly follow the recipe. You can always tailor it to your needs. And what's a rough chop? For greens, I like to kind of get them in a ball as much as I can. They're a little unruly. Not chop my finger. And basically, I'm just making a couple cuts. I'm not finely slicing it, but I'm just getting it into like bite-sized hunks. Okay. I'd say that's a rough cut. It's a rough chop. They're going to shrink down too as they start to lose water. The last thing you might want to get out is Parmesan cheese if you have any at home, because you'll want to sprinkle that over the top if you do. And I use vegan Parmesan. There's a couple brands that are really good. Vio Life is one of them, and Trader Joe's has a really cheap Parmesan that's already shredded. So I'm getting to a boil here, and I'm going to now set my timer for 25 minutes. You can set it for 20 and check on it, but 25 is safe. And then I'm going to turn it down to low or like a simmer. On mine, it's like 2 or 3, the temperature. But yeah, you just want it to simmer. So little bubbles are happening, but it's not a roaring boil once it hits an initial boil. And so, folks, the only thing we have left to do is to slowly add in your milk or cream when you're done. So basically, you can remove the heat, add in some milk, give it a stir, add in your spinach, stir it a couple times, add in your sausage, and then take a look and see how does it taste. Add some salt and pepper if you want, but that's it. That's the whole dish. And you can refrigerate it, add some Parmesan. It'll keep you toasty tomorrow when we all have a snow day, hopefully. Yeah, and that's it. Does anyone have questions? Don't forget to set your timer. I see maybe it's Judy's hand raised. Looks like it.
Maybe it's been raised since the last question. I don't know.
Oh.
Judy, do you have another question?
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that it went to a boil, we're putting it down to a simmer. So now we add in the quinoa and the spinach at the same time.
Yes, you can add your quinoa and not your spinach though. So your quinoa should be in there, and then you're going to cook it for 25 minutes. You're going to add your spinach, your whatever kind of milk or cream you're using, if you are. That's going to happen at the very end. You'll put your sausage, your spinach, and milk when it's done after those 25 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Yeah, so I wish I get to eat and see all your tasty creations. Unfortunately, we are at the time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. One quick note is that we will still have some workshops happening that involve cooking. And some of these kits can be free depending on if you work with our community partners. And so we'd love to connect with folks who are still interested in being a part of our community and doing more cooking workshops online.